Hello, everyone. This is Sadhana Alangar, HL7's Director of Education. Welcome to this co-chair training on Leading Through Facilitation by John Hatem. John is an HL7 treasurer and the co-chair of the pharmacy work group. John, over to you.
Thank you. A little background. I have a long history in healthcare, more than 45 years. I've done everything from work as a registered nurse in academic medical centers for about 11 years. It was surgical ICU, trauma, transplant, burn unit. I then moved to an informatics position, the first nursing informatics position at the University of Colorado Hospital. Today, there are about 14 people in a position that I held by myself too many years ago. It was during that time frame when I got my first HL7 experience, HL7 version 2 at that point. I then left kind of the hospital setting, that safe environment, and started working in software company roles over 20 years. All of it was in California, primarily in health information exchange work that existed in the United States and also internationally. So I did a lot of traveling all over the world. HL7 was the focus in all of those various projects. When I thought I was essentially done with my career in healthcare and was going to retire, I went back to visit my advisor when I was in grad school. I was living in California at this time. Went back to Colorado, and she said, let's go to lunch. We go to lunch, and the next thing I know, she's pitching me about teaching. After a interesting side conversation, I agreed to finally take that role on, and I taught for a year. And then she retired and told me this ahead of time, and they were still looking for a director for the program. So I stepped in for 2 years and as interim director. And currently, I'm a part-time instructor in the same program. And then my experience with HL7, it's long over 20 years. I want to say closer to 25. Currently, I've been a co-chair in the pharmacy work group, at least I think around 10 years. And I was elected to serve as the treasurer for HL7 and have been in that role this entire year and will be for this coming year. And then I need to make a decision about whether to run for another 2-year term, which I think I'm likely to do. I also interact and work with other HL7 work groups. I attend the weekly workflow meetings and the O&O healthcare product. That's probably enough about me. A little background, I have an industrial engineering degree as my first college degree. Went back to school kind of a little sideways, got a degree in nursing, and then focused almost everything there on informatics and picked up an MBA because the only way I could kind of focus on informatics at the time where I lived was to do a dual master's degree. So it was a master's degree in nursing and an MBA at the same time. Enough about that, or enough about me. This is kind of the agenda or the outline for today's session. We're going to talk about the learning objectives, discuss what are some of the different types of HL7 facilitator roles, because there isn't just one. We're going to compare and contrast the role of the facilitator to the role of workgroup co-chair. And because there's a lot of communication and dynamics involved in the facilitation role, we're going to talk about the dynamics of group decision-making, listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics, and principles for building sustainable agreements, and then do a retrospective at the end. Primarily, the learning objective is to provide some skills required to be an effective HL7 workgroup facilitator. You're going to hear about other skills in your various training on what co-chairs do and really drill into the weeds on a lot of the other, I'll call it administrative tasks they have. This particular skill set, though, you're going to find is very critical. If you've been an HL7 member and you've attended a work group, whether or a weekly conference call, you can understand that whoever is the chair of that particular session, or whoever the co-chairs that are there, if you have somebody that is skilled at facilitating the conversation and keeping things moving forward, making sure everybody's participating, it's really an amazing experience, a lot different than if you don't have that skill set within that particular work group. It actually can be sometimes quite frustrating if you don't have that skill, especially if you're new. Upon completion, we hope that you gain some knowledge and skills in the following area. So you'll understand these various facilitator roles within HL7. There are formal roles. You'll understand some of the dynamics of group decision-making. You'll learn a few skills around facilitative listening, dealing with difficult dynamics, and some principles for building sustainable agreements. These are the formal roles. And while these names have changed over the years, in general, these still exist today. There are modeling facilitators. So let's say that you attended the pharmacy work group, or for that matter, any other work group, where they had a focus on some particular clinical domain. And if they chose to or needed to, and they don't all do this, but if they did and decided they wanted to develop a model for their particular clinical domain, you would use the skills of someone either within your group, and it could be a co-chair, it could be just somebody from the HL7 community who has these skills, and they can help you build out a model that can be, so to speak, reusable and understandable to people in other domains because it's the same type of approach in building the model out. There are publishing facilitators. As you probably are all aware, HL7 produces a number of standards, and there's a formality to that process. Everything from describing your project, building a scope statement, and then building whatever it is that you're building to accomplish some particular goal. That may mean that you're working with an external party who brings something forward and they want to build an implementation guide. And I'm not going to go into the weeds of that, but I'm just trying to provide some examples. The publishing facilitator helped to make sure that the content is submitted in an appropriate way, that the guidelines, both in terms of dates and timelines, are met, so that if you do want it to be voted at a particular work group meeting, you hit your goals so that it's published in a way in which people can read that. And then at the end of the day, once it passes through that ballot process, they're also the folks that help make sure that you've, crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's to make sure that everything happens in the way it should, so it's available to the community at large. There are vocabulary facilitators. As you, I'm sure, are aware, no matter what resource you look at, there are always elements that have terms. Vocabulary is very important, and we need to either look at value sets, or we need to look at what type of vocabulary needs to go there. We need to maybe look at exemplar value sets. In other words, this is the type of vocabulary user of resource XYZ, and we're not telling you that this particular element, this is the vocabulary you must use every time you use it. We're saying this is the type of vocabulary. And typically when you see that, it's something along the lines of an exemplar built from some SNOMED terms. I know I'm scratching the surface, but I just want to give you a little bit of a flavor for what each of these facilitators do. Project facilitators, they vary. Sometimes the project facilitation comes external. It may be that another entity, it could be either an accelerator or it could be someone who works within the industry, brings a project forward and they want to build it on top of FIRE or one of our other HL7 standards. And if they do, we need somebody that knows how to manage that group and manage that work. They typically interact, though, with one or more work groups that have the domain experience and the in-depth understanding of how their resources work, so that when the project facilitator and those folks that work within individual work groups, and it could be co-chairs, make sure that, are we identifying new requirements here? Are the requirements fine? And is there an understanding issue? Maybe they don't understand how something works and how it needs to all come together. And then there are timelines associated with these projects as well. So those are kind of your formal, if you will, HL7 facilitator roles. I am going to break in at the end of two more slides for the first time, and I'll take questions if there are some. So there are a variety of definitions for facilitator. I'm not going to read every one of these, but I am going to read the one. And the references for the texts or the books that these came from are at the bottom of the slide. And I am a fan of Sam Kainer and colleagues' book. And I think you're going to see that at the end of this presentation as well. But this description really kind of captures in a nutshell what a lot of this presentation is about. Your job as a facilitator is to support everyone to do their best thinking in practice. To do this, the facilitator encourages full participation, promotes mutual understanding, and cultivates shared responsibility. By supporting everyone to do their best thinking, A facilitator enables group members to search for inclusive solutions and build sustainable agreements. Probably the best way that I tend to think of this, well, it's my favorite phrase, actually. I've used this before in presentation. As a facilitator, you may not be the co-chair of that particular meeting that you're part of. And you may be a co-chair, but you're not, excuse me, the chair of the meeting in which you're attending. So you can act as a facilitator. It's not a formal role. Remember, it's an informal role, but you can read the room. This is John Hatem's expression, read the room. You're going to look and see who's attending. If you've been in the job a while, you'll know, in the role a while, you'll realize, oh, we have some people that are new to this particular meeting. Here's a lot of the regulars. This is good. I'm going to make sure that because I have some new people here that we identify them, ask what their interests are, see how new they are. They may actually not be new to HL7 at all. They may be just new to your particular domain or work group. So it's kind of getting a sense of what's going on. And remember, the goal, you may have an agenda for that meeting, and you have a chair for that meeting, one of the other co-chairs, and you have various tasks you want to try to accomplish. A facilitator is, though, trying to make sure that is everybody contributing that wants to contribute, and are some of the people that are quiet, are you getting a sense that they want to contribute too, and they're just kind of silently not contributing, and maybe you need to pull them out of it a little bit. You also have some responsibilities, and we're going to come back to this, to make sure that if there's some troublesome dynamics going on in the room, then a facilitator really wants to take that on. That doesn't mean you're aggressive. It doesn't mean that you're intrusive. It means that you're trying to find ways to kind of move the conversation forward in a productive way. And there are going to be some skills and some other attributes that we're going to be talking about on some future slides. This is the book, one of the books, and there may be a newer version than it's now, and that's just a repeat of what I said there on the right. So yeah, it's support everyone to do their best thinking and practice. So whether you're experienced or not experienced, there's value in having a facilitator that can bring out all those various thoughts and make sure you're all moving to some kind of cohesive, if you will, goal. Let me stop there and see if there are questions. And Sadhna, if you have anything in the chat you think is important for me to understand, that would be great to know too.
Yeah, there is a question on slide 5.
Okay.
Are these roles all voted on? Meaning, are they elected roles?
No.
Or are these implicit roles of co-chair?
These are not, first of all, you do not have to be a co-chair to be in one of these roles. Each work group makes a decision about who they want to take on these roles. Sometimes when I first was joining a work group, and it was, when I say join, I was not a co-chair. It was probably over 20 years ago. They had a very formal structure, okay? It had nothing to do with the fact that fire wasn't around. These roles have existed for a long time, but they were building a lot of standards for the first time in domains, and so they had a lot of terminology issues. So the vocabulary facilitator was very formal, and there was a person specifically assigned to that task. Project facilitators come and go, it seems like, again, not formally elected. Publishing facilitators, not formally elected, but it's nice if you have that person who's skilled and understands all the ins and outs. And modeling facilitators seem to come and go as well. So not every work group has all of these roles, but they can, and they're not elected. Any other questions? And did that answer the question? Hopefully it did.
John, this is Susan. I just have one comment. It's really important if you're doing a project that you have somebody covering the tasks that are in these roles anyway. I've seen I'm a vocabulary facilitator and have been for years, and I've seen a lot of things wrong, miscoded because they didn't have one.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with asking your co-chairs if that particular work group doesn't have them. Either if you have the skills, maybe you want to volunteer to take that task on, or if you don't, you may say, should we reach out? This is one of the suggestions I have frequently when I hear people raising issues in a domain that I'm not in, is say, should we reach out to the terminology experts to get an answer to that question, rather than just sitting there spinning our wheels or trying to guess? because as the person who just spoke knows, guessing is not going to solve the problem, you know, and spinning our wheels is just going to delay getting the right answer. So thank you for that.
So sometimes, you know, when you're joining an established work group, you know, one that's been around for quite a while, you know, I mean, vocabulary, who's serving as a vocabulary facilitator is, you know, obvious, but some of these others aren't so much. You know, I'm just a little surprised some of this wasn't covered. You know, I almost feel like with some of these older work groups that, you know, the same people have been involved with them forever and ever, and it's not always easy for new people to acclimate to that and, you know, just kind of figure out what's what and who's who. So if there's any suggestions anyone has, you know, for navigating that, that would be awesome.
That's a great question. I don't know if it's a facilitator question, but I still think it's a great question. And my suggestion, just having been a long time member of work groups, both as a co-chair and not as a co-chair, is don't be shy about asking questions that you think, oh, everybody knows that. Don't trap yourself in that little hole there. Reach out, ask questions. Don't be surprised if the answers are not as, how can I say this politically correctly, as consistent as you might find if you look at the HL7 Essentials page. It may be that that particular work group, like you said, has a lot of experienced people that have been there for a long time, and they may know how they do business, and maybe they just need kind of a nudge or a subtle suggestion that maybe we need some other skills within our work group. I don't know that that's any rocket science recommendations there, but I think my big thing is don't be shy about speaking up and asking those questions. Any work group worth their weight should be able to take that kind of input and work with that. I'm going to keep moving. Is there another question first? We're going to have plenty of time. There's only about 17 or 18 slides here, folks. So this talks about the co-chair role. The work group co-chair is what it describes here as the administrative leader of the work group. The person holding this office is often elected, I would say most of the time elected, but they can be appointed by HL7. That happens rarely, but it does happen. The co-chair presides over the meetings of the work group and conducts its business in an orderly fashion. I'm going to dive into that in a second here. When the work group is not in session, the co-chair's duties include acting as its head and its representative of the outside world and its spokesperson. So let's talk about that phrase that says presides over the meetings of the work group and conducts its business in an orderly fashion. So in our work group, this pharmacy work group, and others do a lot of things similar to this, our co-chairs meet before our scheduled weekly conference call. And what we do is we attempt to say, are there critical issues that we need to add to the agenda? So we create the agenda for that week, the coming week. We publish that agenda. That agenda can be fed by projects that are going on that we're aware of. It could be fed by an email that just came in that same day, or actually the day before the agenda went out, and we need to update it because maybe there's a time sensitivity to talking about an issue. It may be that we need to, before discuss a particular topic, that we need to reach out to another work group or another individual who has specific information they want to bring forward, and we still don't understand the problem well enough without their input. So co-chairs are taking a lot of that on to make sure behind the scenes when we do have those meetings, whether it's a work group meeting or whether it's a weekly conference call, that they're as efficient as possible. So agendas should be published. In addition to the agenda, we also take minutes. We share that and pass that back around each other. There's actually no rule that the minute taker needs to be a co-chair. I think it's pretty unusual, but I haven't been in every work group, so it wouldn't surprise me if some work groups do that a little bit more than we do. In pharmacy, for instance, our co-chairs put the agendas together with input from anybody, including non-co-chairs. And then we also take minutes and rotate that amongst ourselves. When that work group is not in session, that's when all that other activity, reaching out to other work groups, talking to individual project leads that are bringing work to us to make sure that what we need in order to conduct that meeting or to give them what they need to solve their problem is being done. I'm talking about co-chair roles here, but I think you can read between the lines. There's a little bit of facilitation in all of those activities. Facilitator co-chair. So this is laying out a lot of the different skills that you see side by side. This conversation is really focused on facilitators, so I'm going to just dive right into that highlighted box there where you see it's the same thing on both sides, and that is true. Co-chairs and any other person that's attending a meeting, and by the way, facilitation can happen even from a non-co-chair, so I don't want to slight anybody that's attending the meeting that's not a co-chair. They are encouraging full participation. They are promoting mutual understanding and cultivate shared responsibility. So for instance, if I'm not sharing, the most common example that I can give you is when I attend a work group meeting the very first day, it's not uncommon that we will have people who've never attended a work group meeting before or have never attended a pharmacy work group meeting. So in addition to doing introductions with everybody, and we know who you are and where you work and what your interest is in attending the meeting, we then ask, would you like us to do an overview of our material and content? And we provide that. It's usually done on day one of a work group meeting. On a weekly conference call, that's unlikely. I won't say that never happens, probably because that weekly conference call is full of a lot of activities. And just one other heads up, it's not unusual that if a new person attends that, it's almost like they're walking into the middle of a conversation that's been going on for 6 years or 6 months, for a long time in any sense. And it's like kind of confusing. So you kind of have to step back at least a little bit and say, and very quick, and it's probably still a little too high level, but you go, this is what we're trying to accomplish in today's meeting. And that's what a facilitator can do. They can give them some sense of it. So the individual, even if they don't want to fully participate, kind of has some understanding of what this conversation is about today. If you don't do that, I mean, they might as well not even be attending because it's going to be tough for them to understand what you're trying to accomplish in that meeting. So the facilitator really does need to take on that role to kind of bring everybody up to speed. It may be that that individual, even though they've never participated, knows the domain really well and knows the problems really well. And if you're talking about an actual use case, which is about a clinical thing and not in the nuts and bolts of a standard, that can still be hugely valuable. And you as a facilitator need to pull them out and pull them into the discussion. These next few slides are going to jump into some of the dynamics of group decision-making, facilitative listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics with a number of examples, and principles for building sustainable agreements. I'm going to stop here just for another second and pause and see if there are any other questions or comments. And they're always welcome. And Saad, if you see them, just let me know. And if there are not,
no questions in the chat.
Okay, I'll keep going. The dynamics of group decision making. Think of this as a little bit like my example. You're walking into a work group meeting for the first time, and maybe it's a group of people. It's you and maybe some of your colleagues, or maybe several other people working on a project, and you haven't really participated in this particular work group before. So you have a frame of reference. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to have a frame of reference. But what you don't know, and what the co-chairs don't know, is your frame of reference the same as the frame of reference that they have or they bring to the same problem? And again, these are not bad things to have frame of reference. The goal of a facilitator, though, is how do we kind of take these differing frames of reference and reach a point where we can have that shared framework of understanding. Part of that is time, because if you're new, or even if you've been experienced, if it's new to this particular problem or new to the space, you need to kind of think about and recognize and acknowledge there may be divergent thinking. There could be different kinds of behaviors going on. Some people, when they first enter a new group like this, they do self-censorship. And what's that mean? It can be anything from these people know what they're talking about. They don't need to hear my voice. I'm not going to say anything because I'm brand new. And many other kind of internal dialogues you'll have. You really need to identify people that you can see they know what's going on. And as a facilitator, you need to pull them out. Okay. You can also see the personality taking the fixed positions. This person is typically not shy, and they will tell you, this is the way the problem, well, first of all, they'll do it in many different ways. One way is, this is the problem. They have their definition of the problem, and you can't change that definition. It's fixed. Or they'll say, this is the solution, and they'll tell you how the problem should be solved. And you need to find a way as a facilitator to kind of move them through that particular fixed position. And there are skills and approaches you can use with those kind of individuals as well. Win-lose mentality, these are the ones that are pretty easily identified. In other words, it doesn't matter what you bring to the table, whether they're facts, whether it's new information, whether they're excellent use cases. My way is the right way. Your way is the wrong way. I don't care what you tell me. I'm not going to do that because my way is the way. I want to win this argument. I'm not going to lose it. That win-lose mentality can really be very, very frustrating in meeting dynamics. Reliance on authority, that's a little bit about, those people know, they've been doing this forever. They have all this knowledge. They have these skills. I'll just trust that they know what they're doing best. I would always caution people, even as somebody who's been around as long as I am, do not presume that people, just because they've been around a long time or have a lot of knowledge, have, if you will, that perfect view and the perfect understanding of the problem that's going to result in the perfect solution. You just can't make that assumption. As we all know, we've seen time and time again where a reliance on authority is not always the best approach. Over time, as you're working with individuals, you can move beyond that groan zone. You can take those competing frames of reference, and as people learn where people are coming from and they understand and they share their ideas, and the facilitator is making sure that maybe they need to restate some things so everybody understands it. Maybe it wasn't clearly stated the first time. You're helping people move towards that convergent thinking and shared framework. Understanding, I am going to read probably most of the slide because I just want to emphasize it. All right. Understanding group dynamics is an indispensable core competency for anyone who wants to help their group tap the enormous potential of participatory decision-making. I don't know about you, but this isn't reading the slide, but it's been my experience that if you are open and listen to all the various opinions, even difficult problems can potentially be solved, or you can get closer to a solution when you listen to all the various kinds of inputs. You have to be patient. You have to let the conversation, just move through whatever it needs to move through. It may be moving somebody from a fixed position to a less fixed position. It may be pulling somebody who's doing self-censorship out so that they can share what's going on. It may be overcoming that win-lose mentality that maybe one individual is kind of fostering. And then that last when they're overcoming reliance on authority. You really need to perform all those things this is talking about here. That means being respectful, creating a supportive atmosphere where they're comfortable and they feel safe about communicating what they're saying. Don't let the win-lose mentality individual or individuals or the taking a fixed position individuals shut you down, okay? And the facilitator should be creating that atmosphere that doesn't allow that to happen. Frequently, I have been in situations where I've heard an individual, I could hear a nugget out of their conversation when they just started to speak and share it. And somebody else says, oh, that's not true. Or somebody else will want to shut it down in a variety of ways. It's important to say, well, wait a minute. As the facilitator, you may say, I think there's some value in what John is saying over there. Let's go ahead and hear a little bit more about that. And you, as a facilitator, should call them out. Ask them to provide a little bit more. Make it safe for them to do that. Make sure that if what they're saying is maybe not well formed, and you know how to restate it or re-summarize it, that's fine. That's okay to do that. But at the same time, don't just let that self-censorship just sit out there, or let any of these other kind of approaches shut them down. When we talk about fixed positions, sometimes the fixed position is really not based upon this is my way, it's the only way. It may be a style of communication. So it may be a misunderstanding. And as a facilitator, you can hopefully identify that, and on occasion, keep the conversation going, try to stay impartial, honor their perspective, keep listening, and sometimes restate it in a way that doesn't diminish what they're trying to bring to the table, but at the same time, maybe tries to bring it into some larger decision that incorporates some elements of what they're talking about with some elements of what somebody else is talking about. That kind of same approach can be used with win-lose mentality. You really need to work closely and listen closely to these kind of conversations so that you can formulate these creative, innovative ideas that reflect the weaving together of several perspectives. You know, I've seen it happen, and I've seen it be very successful. And sometimes I'm amazed at where it's coming from. It may be one of the attendees in the meeting that you don't know, but they have that ability on their own. And if you see it, you don't need to step in. You may want to acknowledge it or support it with your own kind of facilitation skills. So it isn't like one person needs to own this particular process, if you will. And lastly, overcoming reliance on authority. I think it's important and critical that if you have a lot of experience in an area, you also should recognize that that doesn't mean that you have all the solutions, that you have all the answers, and you really do need still to focus on collaboration and making sure that others participate and, you know, contribute to the discussion. Don't let them shut down and not contribute. Any more questions at this point in time? I keep checking back because I just think there's going to be a number of points. So, not hearing any, Sadhna, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, no questions here.
All right. Facilitative listening skills. An idea that is expressed in an acceptable communication style will be taken more seriously by more people. These are kind of some basic facts about communication. Ideas that are presented poorly are harder for people to hear. All right. And it's important for the facilitator to listen skillfully and respectfully to everyone, but also really listen to ideas that could be expressed maybe in a clear way. I want to be careful about how I say this, all right? Or in a more understandable way, if you will. And so when you're listening to people speak, if they're being repetitious, you can paraphrase maybe some of that or summarize some of their thoughts so that maybe you can bring it to a crystal clear nugget or a couple nuggets. But that skill frequently needs to happen. I've been in conversations where for 15 minutes, there was a little bit of a ramble. The conversation was on the topic. It went in a number of different directions. It kind of started to go down different tracks. But as a facilitator, I was able to listen and say, oh, you know what? I think they're talking about this. I'm going to try to summarize this and see if that's the point. That's the other thing. You are summarizing it and you're making some judgment there. So that doesn't mean that you're always going to hit the sweet spot with your summarization, but that's your attempt. So be willing and be able to adjust that summarization if need be. When someone is exaggerating or distorting, and sometimes they don't know they're doing that, but when you hear that, well, this is the way it always is. You know, as long as I've worked, this is the way the world works, you know. Facilitator listens to that and they may not start disagreeing with them, but it's the same kind of thing. You're going to try to bring whatever you can out of that particular point they're making, the things that are valid and accurate, and without quarreling over their general comment, you may be able to summarize that as well and bring some focus to it. That's really what you're trying to accomplish there. Tangents. I don't know that I haven't ever been at a work group meeting where I haven't seen somebody go off on a tangent. And that's not just a pharmacy thing, that's just a general meeting thing. A facilitator must treat the speaker with respect and try to have them help have them help us, meaning all the people that are listening, understand his or her points. And sometimes that may be a little bit of that paraphrasing that's going on in the first and the second step, where you may be able to see how you can connect some of those points with some kind of broader context or / focus. When someone is nervous about speaking and their conversation can be broken for many different reasons, and this is not about a language barrier, it could happen. It doesn't matter really what language you speak. I've heard people kind of stutter and stop, and they come to a pause and they're never really sure where they're going next. Your role as facilitator is to kind of help them relax. You can draw them out, just ask them some non-directive questions, open-ended questions. And I think as a reminder, remember, open-ended questions are questions that when you ask it, they can't be answered with a yes or with a no. You want a little bit more meat than that, all right? So by doing that, though, you can still bring that individual who's struggling a little bit with speaking about some subject matter out, and you can bring them into the conversation. This is just a laundry list of various communication challenges. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Dynamics. You have somebody that will repeat ideas that someone else has already expressed, they'll quibble over minor details, openly express strong emotion, takes the discussion to a very abstract level, uses jargon that is difficult. I'm not going to read every one of these. And I think I've seen just about every one of these skills at an HL7 meeting. And some of them can be challenging to deal with. Probably one of the tougher ones for some people to deal with is openly express strong emotion. I don't know if it's because of my own upbringing with a family that everybody thought the normal communication style was to argue, but for me, I always found that sometimes it's say, can we pause for a second? I want to make sure that I understand this. I can tell that you really feel strongly about this. You don't negate their feelings, but you try to lower the temperature, if you will. And if you have others in the group that are capable of doing that, because you want to be careful, you don't want to feed the fire either. If they're really strong, if you start disagreeing, and you're just kind of throwing more and more fuel on this fire, that's not really going to help. So you have to find ways to kind of lower that temperature, if you will, and to pull out those nuggets from whatever the individual is trying to talk about. Jargon that's difficult to understand. That can be everything from the basic thing where I don't know what a resource is. I know that seems very basic, but there are people that don't know that attend some meetings, to I don't understand those acronyms you're using. We all have worked in healthcare and we understand that seems acronyms are what we live by. Those little TLAs, they're all over the place. So sometimes you have to step back and say, just for context, what we're talking about here is this, and try not to use jargon if you can. Don't use acronyms, and spell out whatever the issue is in plain, simple English. I'm looking to see if I want to highlight one of these more than others, but obscure problems that waste time on insignificant tangents. I've seen this happen frequently, and what typically happens here is I'll personalize it. I may have a pet problem. God, I wish we would solve this problem in our resource. Why haven't we solved this problem in our resource? And it's almost like I'm looking for any way to talk about that problem. So I almost do a self-analysis. I'm describing I think the individual who does this. Any topic that you bring up, they can find a way to link it back to that pet problem, if you will. And so my point is to acknowledge that problem exists, but it's okay to then refocus. But this particular conversation we're having right now is not about that problem. We should talk about that problem, but let's put this over here on the shelf, if you will. And right now, let's just focus on this particular problem. If we find when we're getting closer and closer to how we want to solve this problem, that there is a relationship, we'll come to that. But let's not start talking about that other problem just yet. Let's stay focused on whatever problem is that the discussion was, at least initially, supposed to address. Long-winded speeches, I think sometimes I can be guilty of that. One needs to be careful and cognizant of their own communication styles. And so you need to kind of take a pause every now and then, and maybe even do check-ins. It's not uncommon for me to ask my coachers, was I a little windy today in the work group meeting, or provide feedback to somebody else if you think that's what was going on there, just to get a sense, check in. Folks, disagreements with insincere sugarcoating. I haven't seen that well. I'm sure that exists. Those are always tough because it sounds like this person is just really laying it on pretty thick. And at the same time, there may be a passive aggressive kind of communication style going on there where they're kind of disagreeing, but they're acting like they're not disagreeing when they really are. And you really need to, depending upon where you are in a project and how you need to deal with that, you may need to identify what the core disagreement is and almost ignore the sugarcoating part of the comment. If you focus on that, you really won't get very far. Too loud voices. As I've gotten older, I'm never sure if that isn't the case where they were hard of hearing. So one needs to acknowledge that depending upon the ages of the individuals that are talking. Apologizes for everything she or he says. Yeah, that's a common strategy. Some of that's deep set within people's own psych profile, if you will. The critic, a couple of those last points there, that the person who nitpicks everything that somebody uses, the individual who sits smug and self-assured as if they know everything. These are typically not people that are not talking because they don't have opinions or they're shy about it. These are people that have talked, but they also think they know everything, and you can just pick it up in their nonverbals. It's a tough thing to tackle when you're trying to facilitate conversation. So you really need to pick those particular issues very carefully. Sometimes you may know that individual and you may know that they have a lot to contribute, so you may approach it from that perspective. John, I know you have worked with this particular type of problem before. What have you done, and call them out so that maybe you can move them out of that self-assured, smug kind of, if you will, style of communication. Distractions, there are many kinds, and I think we're going to talk about that in another one of the slides coming up. But whispering to somebody else sitting nearby while someone else is talking, taking a cell phone call in the middle of a meeting, especially in a small meeting room, making sure that doors for your meeting room are closed so that you're not interfering with people passing by. There's just a ton of these kind of things. Whispers is just one example, but there are many that can be distractions.
John, there's a question.
Okay, go ahead.
How should I handle a group that feels like they all need to talk on a subject, even though they are all agreeing and basically saying the same thing?
That's a great question. In a perfect world, what I have done, now this is easy to do if you know the group of people. I will text one of them and say, we have a lot of consensus around this topic, and everybody seems to be talking over each other almost as if they hadn't heard the other people was agreeing with them, And so you can do this in those passive ways like that. If you were to be more assertive, though, you may say something along the lines of, I think we've heard from 3 or 4 different individuals in this particular topic, and as a facilitator, I would say something like the following, okay? I think we have a resolution here, or at least a proposed resolution. What I'd like us to maybe see if we can move to the next step. If we have consensus, is this something that we need to formulate into a motion to go to the next step? Are we talking about a tracker where 5 people are talking about how to solve it in the same way? And if we are, then let's kind of, if you will, break that cycle of the conversation and move to another step in the process. Sometimes the step can be, if it was a tracker resolve discussion, let's formalize it. Let's put a clear motion forward. And what is our disposition proposal for dealing with that particular issue? If it's not a tracker, it's still something that you can do. Process can obviously be defined in many ways. You don't need trackers to do that. And I would always suggest that you try to kind of break out of that conversation that's just kind of stuck in one place to kind of move, if you will, the conversation forward. This particular list here is trying to create some of the steps that you can do when you have those various types of different dynamics. So whether it's the first one is just in general establishing supportive group norms. And I think that's a conversation that the co-chairs, and I think you're all aware of this, there's typically more than one co-chair in every work group. The particular work group I was just in had 4. We've had as many as 5 over the years and as few as 3. They can meet and establish some group norms so that if they're part of the problem, they can contribute to that, how they move forward when they've got agreement. They can also establish how they want to deal with that issue when the particular topic is being communicated by 4 or 5 people. In that particular example, somebody shared. Step out of the content and talk about the process. That's a little bit about what I was suggesting with my tracker discussion, or even a non-tracker discussion. Kind of change the focus. Now we're not talking about the content. Let's suggest, what are we going to do with this information? We now have an agreement. How are we going to go forward? So there are many ways in which you can do that. Break into small groups. That may be helpful depending upon the size of your work group. If the problem is complex enough, or if there are, let's say, 2 or 3 very creative solutions, but you need a little bit more detail, you break into small groups, have each one of them bring their proposal to kind of some summary, if you will, and bring that forward. And maybe by looking at it, you can then move forward by making a decision about which one of them maybe has some of the best options, or maybe there are bits and pieces you can bring from all of them together to create one solution. Sometimes it's best, if you're going to break into small groups, you describe a certain type of process or an ask of each group to be the same. In other words, what I'd like you to do when you go off and discuss ABC's approach is I'd like you to kind of give us a sense of what are the benefits of it, and if there are weaknesses, what are those weaknesses? What are some of the challenges? Would this be new work that we've never done before? Do we know if somebody else is doing the same thing in another work group or solve the problem? In other words, bring and ask every group to bring that forward so that you're getting some sense of how mature maybe each one of those solutions is. Engaging in a period of suspended judgment is basically saying, all right, we've been talking about this for a long time. Let's not, and it doesn't sound like we're reaching an agreement, and we've been talking about this almost forever. Why don't we, first of all, stop for a minute? Let's not think about this as this is the right solution, this is the wrong solution. And you could even say, we are not going to solve that problem in today's discussion. We've spent 15 minutes on it in our agenda of 1 hour, and we thought it was going to be solved in 15. We don't think we're going to solve it within the next hour. Let's take a breather on this. We can come back to this. We'll make sure it's on the agenda for next week. Or do we need to assign some activities for people to go off and spend time on? But the actual discussion of itself is not going to continue in the meeting right now. Switch to a structured go around. Frequently, sometimes I've done that when in a meeting, I have a person that's either dominating or I have several somebodies that are not contributing. And so we may just go around the room. I don't want to put people on the spot. So you say, do you have any thoughts that may be relevant to this particular discussion, or any examples that may be relevant to this particular discussion? And you can start and go around the table a little bit like that. And you could limit it too. I only want a couple sentences. I only want a couple comments. I don't need a 5-minute, lecture on that particular issue. So you can create some, if you will, criteria for that structured go around rather than just a random hit or miss. Give me 2 sentences. Acknowledge outside distractions. I kind of mentioned that before. That's just making sure if you've got noise or people or phones or meetings or something else is going on in the same room or side conversations, you really want to call attention to that and kind of curtail it. Encouraging more people to participate, any way in which you can do that. I think the richer the conversation is, the more people participate, the better solution you're going to have, and the more buy-in you're going to have for that solution as well. We have not done, in most work groups that I've been, a very good job of educating members about group dynamics. I do think that's worthwhile. It probably works even better when you have a group that's worked together for a long time and maybe is a little stale in terms of their understanding about group dynamics. So I actually think that's a good idea. And probably more of us that have been around a while should bring that back and focus into our work groups. So what are these principles from this kind of entire presentation? Understand the dynamics of group decision-making. Realize that it isn't just people come together and everything's going to work out fine. You really need, as a facilitator, to encourage full participation, promote that mutual understanding, foster inclusive solutions, and cultivate shared responsibility. I mentioned it before, and it's critical to being successful as a facilitator. Patience, perseverance, and tolerance. You don't have to be mad at somebody, you know, that seems to struggle with their communication style. But if you're patient and you're almost relentless in your perseverance towards reaching the goal, which is hopefully a common solution that everybody's happy with, that's going to take you there. And this is the final slide. I think there's another little bonus slide here in a second, but we talked about HL7 facilitator roles and a variety of them, the formal ones, and the informal facilitator role as well. We did do a comparison to contrast of the facilitator to the role of work group co-chair. We talked a lot about the dynamics of group decision making, about facilitative listening skills, dealing with difficult dynamics, and principles for building sustainable agreements. So I'm open to all kinds of discussion and topic. And if there are any, let me know. That's your bonus slide. You'll see it in the presentation. So
if you have any questions, please at this time unmute your microphone and ask questions, or okay. There is one coming through the chat. Hypothetically, of course, how would you handle a situation where a project team is sponsored by ONC and feels as though additional input may not be as valuable and may brush off or rush through any related conversation/input?
and what you, well, I guess the first question that I would have is who's monitoring that particular project? In other words, or who's the project manager? If they're bringing that particular project to a work group, my work group, and I understand it's an ONC sponsored project, then I feel it's my obligation as a facilitator in my work group to bring that input out. I understand why they may want to rush it. That project manager probably has timelines and deadlines. They don't want to hear all this. At the same time, these are the same things we've been talking about all along. So it's not, my comment isn't going to be the silver bullet that solves all of these kind of communications, because some people are just going to be push, 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 but you really almost have to slow them down. If you really think it's maybe focused by whoever that project team lead is, you may want to meet with them before. And maybe the first time you experience this, you might meet with them before they come the next time, because usually these are not just one meeting and they're done. And then I would follow up with them and try to kind of reach that that understanding, be respectful, but say, you know, when you bring topics to our work group, we do have a lot of interested parties who want to ask questions that are not really clear. If you think you've addressed those in some of your material, maybe you need to provide to our work group at least some perspective on why those issues are not as critical for your particular project, or how they're already being addressed maybe in your project and you just don't want to repeat that. But you need to have that, I think, in that safe space of offline, not in the meeting itself. It would be tough to do what I've just said within the meeting. I don't know that that's helpful, Aaron, but that's the way I would think about treating it. And it will be a challenge. Especially when people have projects that they want to resolve. I think it's always a challenge, but at the same time, you should be able to ask questions, all types of questions of any project. Again, remember, who's ever facilitating that, you also need to be aware of what's going on in the conversation. You know, where's it going? How's it fit within the time frame of that particular project?
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Liz, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, so I feel a little called out by this question because I work for ASTP ONC. if it helps any, I mean, part of the reason we work with HL7 is to get broader feedback and have robust discussions and, you know, get as much input as we can. So it may be helpful to have that in the back of your head as well, and to try and, you know, work with the project manager or the project team to gently encourage that this is the work. You know, this is the input that we're looking for, are those, you know, broader conversations.
I think that's good feedback. Yeah. Other questions?
Any other? Okay, there's
I'm
another one.
gonna stop
This,
sharing just to see if there are faces. I don't know faces. Okay.
there's another question coming through.
Go
How
ahead.
would you suggest that work group members need to gain a deeper understanding of an issue or an artifact they want to develop before pushing ahead?
That's a great question. My typical way of approaching a problem like that, I don't know if this is facilitation, maybe it is indirectly, is I like to see a rich understanding of the use case of the problem. If it's a clinical problem, I don't want you to talk about the standard. In other words, bye, Susan. Good to see you too. I want to understand the problem in as near as the source of the problem as I can. So those use cases are real world examples. If it is a technical problem and that's a technical discussion, then I want to make sure that within my work group, I have my experts that are there that can listen to and respond to that particular question. I don't know if that's speaking to your issue that you're raising, but I don't know if you don't do that, that you're not going to have as rich an understanding. In other words, I am skeptical when somebody comes with a solution before they even tell me their problem. So I myself almost always ask, what's this problem? Can you just describe or spend more time on that? If they don't know the problem and they just know the solution, I'm a little uncomfortable. I would say, without putting them on the spot, I would say, it sounds like you have a great understanding of some issues around the problem, but do you know who can speak to the problem in greater terms? Is that somebody else within your sphere that you work with or on your project team that could come and speak to us or provide us some more information? Because we need to understand that. And you may want to open up to the group that you're in and say, is anybody else experiencing the same problem? Is anybody struggling with the same issue? Or do you think you are? And maybe what we need to do is listen to a little bit about what you think about that particular problem. Because sometimes we find that if my frame of reference is talking about the problem with my narrow blinders on, and somebody else says, I think my problem's the same, but I'm not sure because the way you're expressing it maybe isn't the way that I'm going to. Maybe you need to call them out. And maybe, and sometimes I've seen this happen, by discussing it with two people, then a third person says, oh yeah, I understand that because I'm experiencing this. And all of a sudden now the conversation becomes a little richer, okay? It isn't just about one perspective or one frame of reference or one solution. It's now you're getting a little richer understanding. And every time that happens, I always talk about HL7's conversations are the most nuanced that I've ever been in my life. And when you build the standards out, whether it's the resources with fire or whether it was the V3 models or whatever it is, version 2 issues or CDA document structures, if you don't have those rich, nuanced discussions, your solutions are not going to address as many problems as you probably thought. So again, that's my 2 cents.
Another question.
Okay.
How would you address bullying of co-chairs by other co-chairs? For example, repeatedly interrupting, dismissing, or minimizing an opinion or perspective.
Yeah, that's tough. I think you have to have, I've had some challenges with that very issue personally myself. I mean, I can be pretty strong-willed when I have some opinions. And I think it's important that you're called on that, hopefully respectfully. And I both have been called on that and I've called others on that. in one-on-one separate conversations where you've been really frank and say, this is where both of you can say from your own perspectives, I'm really frustrated because I feel like you're cutting me off, or you're not understanding my entire point, or whatever that issue is that you're having with the other individual. And you yourself must be able to acknowledge that you've heard and understand what they're saying to you. Because just saying it to another person, as we all know, doesn't mean that you've resolved that particular issue. It's important to have that conversation both ways. Then you, the person who maybe didn't feel aggrieved, you're maybe the person that was having that disrespectful conversation with the other one, or using a disrespectful process. You also need to kind of think about your behavior and find out what you can do or should do to improve that particular style of communication. So again, that's pretty benign, I know, and maybe bland even, but that's how I would think about it. Do you have suggestions yourself? Even if you put them in chat, that's fine. Other questions?
Nothing in chat. If you want to unmute your microphones and ask questions, please do so.
Hi, I joined a little bit late, so I apologize. I was double booked, but the past couple of questions, I really appreciate the insight that you've shared with us. And I'm wondering if there is any way for co-chairs to get together and to be given kind of hypothetical situations to practice these types of things, because I think it's great to hear ways to approach it, but I think sometimes it's hard to apply it individually. And I've been in enough work groups where I see kind of everything that we've talked about today happen a little bit here or there. So I don't know if there's like an opportunity to get co-chairs together, kind of like, I don't know, either in person or in smaller groups, and kind of have them practice like dealing with some of these more difficult issues as a group.
I think that's a good suggestion. I mean, this does not answer your, well, first of all, I think to create that formally would be a good thing to do. I'm unaware that we've ever done that, but I will say that within work groups that I've been in, especially those where there were a number of people that carried over from year to year, even if they weren't all co-chairs, the fact that there were dynamics within that group, and we had what we called out of cycle meetings sometimes, and this is where the chairs within that work group would get together and we would work on issues, but we also had time away from the issues, or there was some social occasion where we could talk about stuff. I mean, I have had somebody tell me that they didn't like something that I did in one of those kind of offline conversations. You know, I have a bad habit sometimes of saying no. In other words, almost dismissing everything that they just said. That was not my intent. It was a knee jerk. I'm not apologizing for it, but I should have, and I did in that particular case. And that person has been a good friend of mine for many, many years in HL7. If they had never said that to me, I would have, who knows what my career would have been like, you know, in HL7, let alone your career in other jobs. So I think, while I think it's a good idea, I think, at least in my experience, it's always been through these informal things. Do co-chairs get together? Certainly do. When I go to a work group meeting, I don't know if it's the history thing, but I get together with people all the time and interact with them, especially co-chairs. Sometimes it's forced, sometimes it's social. And I think sometimes in the social environment, you can get a lot of value out of those kind of exchanges, because then the whole person becomes available to you and you get a different perspective. And then all of a sudden you're comfortable with talking about some of these things that are not easy to talk about within a meeting or after a meeting. I do think you could almost, I mean, this is, you know, social dynamics and communication skills. We could artificially create one. Maybe they should even film one. I mean, I could play every role on that. The worst, most obnoxious member of a meeting I've ever seen, to maybe I don't know if I could ever play the really soft-spoken guy, but anyway. But there are enough people and personalities I know that we could actually film probably give us a focus and a conversation that you want us to have about, and you could probably do something like that. Yeah, it would be interesting. Let's put it that way. Sadhna, I don't know if you have any ideas. I don't think we formally do that though today in any.
No, we don't, but I think that's a good idea, and I need to take it back to the team.
Yeah. So good question.
Any other questions, suggestions? Thanks a lot for those questions. Good questions. Good discussion.
Excellent questions. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, if we've reached our end, I just want to thank you all. And thanks for the questions and the conversations. As usual, I've learned a few things today too, so it's always good. If I see you at a co-chair meeting, I'm actually, strangely enough, ending my co-chair run at the end of this month. So while I've been an HL7 member for a long time, I still will be, and I will be at the May work group meeting. But I won't be a co-chair, so I'll miss the dinner after the first of the year. But if you see me, stop me, ask a question. I'm happy to chat. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for this presentation, and thanks for everything that you've done for HL7.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today and for the excellent discussion. And the next presentation is going to be on January 9th on navigating HL7 processes, by John Duto. And meanwhile, happy holidays and happy New Year to all of you. Till we meet again, bye everyone.
Bye all.
Thank
Take
you.
care.